So, back in 2024, a judgment from India's Supreme Court sent these massive shockwaves across the country. And it wasn't what you'd expect, not some new law or a big celebrity case. No, this was about something that had been hiding in plain sight for, get this, 75 years, right inside India's prisons. So what on earth did they find? Let's get into it. Most disturbing. I mean, can you imagine? That's what the Supreme Court judges actually said out loud in court. That was their gut reaction when they found out what was written in the official rule books, the literal prison manuals for different states in India. Just a moment of pure, unfiltered shock. Okay, but that brings up a really big question, right? And it's kind of the whole point of what we're digging into here. How could something that was official policy for 75 years, since the country's constitution was written, suddenly be so shocking? The answer, it turns out, tells us a lot, not just about prisons, but about modern India as a whole. All right, so let's start with the big reveal. What was this disturbing thing the court found? Well, it was the fact that the state was officially, explicitly, using the caste system to run its prisons. And, the media just jumped all over this. They framed it like this was some shocking, bizarre relic from the past that everyone forgot about. But here's the twist. The source we're looking at today argues that the real story isn't the rule itself, but the surprise. That feeling of shock actually points to a kind of collective blindness, a refusal to see a reality that was there all along. And that leads us right to the heart of why everyone was so surprised. It all comes down to this powerful idea, an ideology really, of castelessness. You see, for decades, when people talked about reforming prisons, they did it with this caste-blind approach. They'd focus on really important things, don't get me wrong, but they talk about them in these generic, caste-neutral ways. But that's like trying to fix a car without ever looking at the engine. It completely misses how caste is just woven into the DNA of the prison system. You can't fix the real problems if you ignore the root cause. Now, this is a really interesting way to think about it. It's a lot like the idea of colorblindness in the US, right? That idea can kind of let people off the hook for historical racial inequality. Well, castelessness in India does something similar. It lets the dominant upper castes see themselves as modern and past all that, while completely ignoring the brutal hierarchies that are still very much alive. In both cases, it's an idea that sounds good on the surface, but really just keeps the old power structures in place. And here's the result of that silence. For 75 years, you had reformers and courts talking about all these things. Overcrowding, rights for people awaiting trial, horrible conditions. And all of that is absolutely crucial, but because they weren't talking about caste, they were missing a huge piece of the puzzle. It's like they were treating the symptoms without ever diagnosing the disease. But then, that long silence was shattered. And it happened because of this one specific case, brought forward by a journalist named Sukanya Shantha. This judgment was the moment everything changed. It was a total rupture in that old, caste-blind way of thinking. So what did the court actually do? Well, it went in and just dismantled these incredibly blatant discriminatory rules. We're talking about things like forcing Dalit prisoners, people from marginalized castes, to do sanitation work simply because of who they are, segregating inmates based on their caste, and this other thing, officially labeling whole communities, these denotified tribes, as habitual criminals, right there in the rule books. Just unbelievable. And the court did not pull any punches. They called it discrimination of the highest form. And that's the key, right? This wasn't just about a few biased prison guards. This was the state itself, using its own rules to enforce the caste system. But honestly, the judgment is so much more than just getting rid of some old, messed up rules. The real power here, the lasting impact, is that it gives activists and lawyers a whole new set of legal tools to fight this ancient system of discrimination. Okay, so there were 3 huge legal advances here. First up, it completely reframed the idea of forced labor, linking it directly to the history of caste. Super important. Second, it brought in this powerful new legal test for something called indirect discrimination. This is a total game changer for fighting systemic bias. And third, it finally called out the historical criminalization of denotified tribes for what it is, caste discrimination. All right, let's unpack that first one about forced labor. The court basically said, hey, that part of the Constitution that bans forced labor, it's not some abstract idea. It was written specifically because of India's long, brutal history of caste-based exploitation. So, when the state forces a Dalit person to clean toilets in prison, it's not just a prison rule, it's a violation of a fundamental constitutional right. And if you think this is just something that happens in prisons or that it's a thing of the past, well, think again. This exact same pattern shows up today, even in something as modern as the gig economy. Check out these numbers from a 2024 report. A whopping 63% of drivers from marginalized caste backgrounds work more than 14 hours a day. Now look at the other drivers, only 16%. So this whole idea of the gig economy being some great equalizer, the data shows it can actually reproduce the very same exploitative patterns we're talking about. Okay, that second big leap forward, indirect discrimination. This is so important. Basically, the legal question changes. It's no longer just, did you mean to discriminate with this rule? Now the question is, does your rule, even if it looks neutral on the surface, have a much worse effect on one particular group? This is a huge deal because it lets you challenge all those sneaky systemic forms of bias that don't have a smoking gun. And that third point, wow. The judgment finally took on this incredibly dark legacy from the colonial era. I mean, for more than 150 years, going all the way back to the British Criminal Tribes Act, the state has basically treated entire communities as if they were born criminals. And now, in 2024, the Supreme Court looked at that long history and said, nope, this was never about crime. This has always been about caste discrimination. So look, this judgment was a massive, landmark victory. No doubt about it. But the analysis we're drawing from makes a really important point. This is the start of the fight, not the finish line. The struggle against what it calls the prison of caste is, well, it's far from over. Because the problem is just so structural. Just look at this number. 68%, almost 7 out of every 10 people waiting for their trial in an Indian jail come from marginalized caste communities. That doesn't happen by accident. That's the result of who gets policed, who gets bail, who gets the benefit of the doubt. It shows that the prison system isn't just a mirror reflecting society's inequalities, it's an engine that actively creates and reinforces them. And interestingly, this leads to a really sharp critique of the judgment itself. You see, in the end, the court ordered the government to remove any mention of caste from prison records. Now, the intention was good, right? To create a casteless system. But it raises this really tricky question. If you stop collecting the data on caste, do you end the discrimination? Or do you just end your ability to see it and prove that it's still happening? There's a quote from the source material that just nails it perfectly. It says that caste isn't some bug or a glitch in the prison system. No, it's foundational. It's the invisible force, the oil that quietly keeps the machinery running smoothly. It's not an error in the system, it is the system. And that really leaves us with this one big idea to chew on. The Supreme Court's judgment was huge. It helped tear down some of the literal walls of discrimination inside physical prisons. But the real challenge, the one that remains, is so much bigger. It's about dismantling that invisible societal prison, the prison of caste itself.